So yesterday was Good Friday at the time I'm making this video, and in fact, the reason I'm so dressed up is because we're going to be heading out to the Easter Vigil pretty soon here. But that experience of venerating the cross that we did at the Good Friday liturgy is still really fresh in my mind, and so I've been thinking about it and even writing about it a little bit. And as I did so, I was reminded of the fact that anyone who doesn't believe what the church teaches about the cross and the mystery of God's atoning sacrifice for us, that kind of behavior among Catholics must appear to be a bit of a morbid fascination. And as a convert to the church, I've had family and friends express their distress at that symbol, especially when they see crosses and crucifixes hanging on the walls of my house. I can hear them saying things like, even if you believe that Jesus died and rose again, and that somehow you believing in that affects you, why focus your attention on such a ghastly symbol? Why not choose something that's a little more uplifting, like maybe the nice things that Jesus taught or the way that he would heal people? So that raises an important question that I think that Catholics and Christians should be contemplating, which is, why do we consider the cross to be such a profound symbol which signifies the significance of our relationship with God? Before I answer that question, I want to make quick mention of what seems to be a growing trend in intellectual and philosophical and metaphysical discourse, especially among Orthodox Christians. I don't mean big O, I just mean little o Orthodox Christians, who want to see everything as a symbol for something else. And I think that there's a temptation to perhaps do that here, like, oh, the cross is a symbol and it means something else, something more than perhaps what we might interpret just through our standard theology. And I have to admit, I recoil a bit from attempts to try to make everything seem more profound than it is. So in the interest of trying to bring some clarity to that, let's just talk about the concept of a symbol here really quickly. A symbol is a thing which is something of its own, but which also points to something else, which can also mean something else. So a hammer and a sickle, for example, these are tools which have their own purpose and their own meaning and their own design, but they also can represent something else, like socialism or communism or Marxism, for example. That's an example of a symbol, like a true symbol. But if you want to say that everything is a symbol for something else, then really you're saying that nothing is a symbol. You're stripping the significance of all true symbols. For example, if I say that everything is beautiful, I'm actually saying that nothing is beautiful, because beauty only acquires its significance in contrast to other things and other objects which are not beautiful or not as beautiful as the things that we would describe as beautiful. If I say everything is green, then really I'm saying that there's no such thing as green, because green only acquires its meaning in contrast to other colors which it can be compared to. In the same way, not everything is a symbol, because some things are actual symbols and point to something else. Some things just are what they are, and they only point to themselves. A naturally occurring rock in a field is just a rock in a field, but rocks arranged in a certain way for a certain purpose by an intelligence, well, that suddenly becomes a symbol that points to something else. The world that we live in, that we occupy, is intelligible, which means that it was designed with an order in mind, because it was designed by an intelligence. And we who are intelligent, we can anticipate that order. We can make sense of it. We can perceive it. And as a result, we should see that order announcing itself in associations and patterns that conform to that order. But that doesn't mean that because those kinds of relationships and patterns exist, all reinforcing and signifying that order and conforming to that order, it doesn't mean that everything is pointing to something else, something that is hidden behind the veil of the material world. For example, someone might create a superhero, a character like Superman, who communicates ideas about power, justice, and maybe self-sacrifice. But that doesn't mean that they are trying to tell us something about Jesus or some other mythical hero necessarily. It could just be that someone noticed certain truths from their own experiences or maybe from reading other literature, and they decided to create a character and a story which amplifies those truths so that they are harder to ignore or avoid. Now, as a Catholic, if we're going to talk about symbols and patterns and revelations of things that are maybe invisible, I would want to talk about sacraments for a second, because sacraments are visible signs of invisible realities. For example, baptism is a cleansing with water. But that tactile, visual, and sensory experience is also a symbol of the invisible fact of a spiritual death and rebirth. Not everything can be described as a symbol in the way that that can be described as a symbol. So returning to the symbol of the cross, because I don't want it to be diluted by these kinds of claims that everything else is a symbol, let's talk about the significance of this symbol and why it is so profound, not just as a symbol, but the thing itself, and why it has become such a focal point in the history and the tradition of what it means to be a Christian and to know Jesus and to know the story of our redemption. So if the cross simply pointed to itself, if it wasn't a symbol, if it was just a revelation of what the thing is, it would be exactly what the Roman Empire, who used it, and who used it in the case of Jesus to crucify him, intended it to be, which is an object of intimidation, of oppression, and a reminder of our own mortality and frailty as human beings who are destined to die. It's a reminder that we will suffer and die eventually, and that we are a slave to these inevitable facts. We have no freedom and no recourse away from them. And that in the case of the Roman Empire, if you don't do exactly what the authorities require, they can accelerate that process towards your inevitable death by nailing you to one of these things. It's a symbol of the tragic fate that awaits us, and it is tragic, by the way, and there should be no shame in admitting that fact, because the one thing that we want is permanence, and it is the one thing that we cannot have. Our entire lives are destined in a direction we don't want to be going, and the cross, or anything like the cross, is a gruesome reminder of that tragic fate. Taken at face value, it is a symbol of fear for anyone who can't look beyond what it could say about itself because of stories like Jesus. But what if someone who is not subject to that same tragic fate, someone who isn't a slave to that destiny that we recoil from, someone who suffers no deprivation, they lack nothing, especially their own vitality, because they are the ground of all being. They are the great I am from which all other things flow and all other things are contingent upon. What if someone like that subjects themselves to the power of that Roman instrument of oppression and the power of death, the power that death holds over us? And because of who they are, it doesn't have the same ultimate effect on them. Of course, I'm talking about Jesus in this case. And instead of being subject to that same effect and the power that death has over us, instead they conquer death by dying on the cross, specifically the cross, that thing that would otherwise inspire so much fear in us, and then they rise again. Well, suddenly that symbol becomes the focal point of our tragic destiny being overcome. It becomes the symbol of our liberator smashing the chains of our own slavery, the thing that we want to be free of but we can't free ourselves of. It becomes the symbol to remind us that death has no power over us anymore, because it is not the end of our story. Now it suddenly becomes the ultimate symbol of what it means to not be afraid, because on the one hand, it should inspire fear in us, but now we know that there is no reason for us to be afraid of it anymore. And no matter how much someone who has power over us, whether they be political or spiritual, they can't threaten us with our own mortality anymore, because something better than this earthly life awaits us. And if we're willing to retrace the steps of Jesus, that's the hope that we can have. And it's also why when St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians that the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing in their sin, but to those of us that are being saved, it is the power of God. I remember when I first encountered that verse, I thought, well, yeah, as a Christian, that's very reaffirming and edifying. But, it's a little bit boastful. Maybe it's a powerful piece of rhetoric, but, isn't that just kind of arrogant? But now I realize that it is a statement of fact. If you're someone who doesn't believe that God permitted our fate to befall him such that it could not affect him in the way that it affects us, then the cross is nothing more than a morbid fascination. But if you do believe that God used this same instrument of torture and death to conquer the thing that we fear most, this tragic fate that awaits us, then it really is an exhibition of his power over the thing that we can't overcome and wish we could more than anything else. But since he can and did, we now have hope. Our story doesn't end in tragedy, but it ends in comedy. And that, to me, is the great message of Easter. Thanks for watching. The reason I can continue making content like this is because of the generous support of my viewers. If you feel called to support this work, then consider joining the Reinforcements, which is my online community. There are multiple tiers, including free access for those who can't help financially but still want to join. You can join up at www.brianholdsworth.ca. Certain levels will also get a free gift basket from Glory and Shine, who is a family-owned Catholic bath and body products company whose beard balm I'm wearing right now. It's like aromatherapy for your face. Even if you don't join, they make amazing products, so check them out at gloryandshine.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe. You don't have to agree with everything I said to get value out of these kinds of conversations, so be sure to subscribe to be edified or challenged. There's value in both.
Pray, brethren, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God the Almighty Father. May the Lord accept the sacrifice